What are the commonalities among leaders who sustain excellence over an extended period of time? All right, Elliott, it's great to have you here on the Learning Leader Show. Welcome, man.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, man. I was reading about a few important people in your life, and I love starting with love. And you acknowledge in the back of your book, your newest book, Make No Small Plans, which people should certainly read because it's a trip, but your grandmother Florence and your parents Mark and Margot and your brother Austin, your wife Nicole. I think without this kind of core group of love, it's almost impossible to accomplish anything of significance. And maybe you can pick one or two, or you can cover all of them, but why are those people so important to you?
Well, they just cared about me regardless of how moronic I was, or when I started to have, any level of success. They were people who, just constantly asked me questions, genuinely cared about what I was doing and how I was doing it. They didn't care about how it was going. And, I think they understood that life is, a journey, and every day, every week, every month, keep enjoying it. You know, they just push me to relish every day and enjoy the process.
You were early on, and so at the beginning of this book, this is kind of where it starts, which I thought was really cool. Essentially, like selling ads for your dad's business. Is that correct? Is that how you would describe it? That was your job?
Exactly. So my dad had started his first business. He'd become an entrepreneur in his early 50s. And he was very interested in commercial real estate and all the stories around it. There's all these colorful characters, the brokers and the developers and the architects and the financiers. And, every building we're in, where the buildings that our restaurants are in, and the gyms that we go to, there's these stories, like how did they design the building, how they finance it, how did they pick the restaurant. He was very interested in this. And he started writing this email newsletter just to a couple hundred people in his Rolodex. And he started writing little kind of weekly interviews with colorful characters in commercial real estate in Washington, D.C. And I, at the time, was a sophomore in college, and I was desperate to be an entrepreneur, desperate. My first two businesses had not worked. I had lost all my money. But I spent 2 straight years. And I was chatting with my dad, and he told me he really wanted to sell ads for this newsletter with a couple hundred subscribers. And he said, he was looking to hire a firm that he was getting, and their request was 20% commission. And I said, well, wait, what if I tried to do the job with this firm? I could get 20% commission of anything I sell. And he said, all right, you got a deal. So my first day was July 1st, 2006. I had no contacts, no resources, no idea what I was doing, had never taken a class in sales. I literally opened up a business journal, newspaper, saw the advertisers in the paper, called one and said, hi, I was interested in selling you advertising. Hang up. Like, okay, call the next one. Like, hi, who buys your advertising? Sarah Smith. Great, can I talk to her? Hang up. Okay, call them back a week later. Hi, this is Elliott Bisnow for Sarah Smith. So, I, built my first Excel model. Like, I literally learned it from scratch. So I was doing, and then, by the way, promptly a few weeks later, after taking notes in the Excel model, like, this person is a jerk, they won't buy ads. I accidentally sent the model in an email to a client with notes about the client instead of sending them a deck. But yes, I started working for my dad as the ad sales guy. And then as we started to coalesce, and this is why I think it's so, you really don't have to be a genius founder. Like, my dad was the visionary with this idea. You can join someone. And then as we came together, we started to innovate the product. We said, hey, let's make it less, articles about people. Let's make it more People magazine of real estate. instead of having come out once a week, let's have it come out every day. On top of that, let's do, quick, updates for, top news that's happening. Let's make it shorter and punchier. Let's launch an events business, actually use the newsletter to promote real estate events. So even though I wasn't the visionary founder, by coming in a few months after, getting my foot in the door through selling ads, I used that to kind of lead the innovation of the business with my dad.
And I read your dad sold the business for 50 million bucks recently. Is that true?
Yeah. So we became co-founders, my dad and I.
Yeah.
And then one of my best friends joined and ended up running the business. And so it was just the three of us. And we never raised, we built the business to 100 team members, but we never raised any money. I didn't even know you could raise money. Like I didn't know it was possible to get investment. Like, from the minute I was selling ads, the first $6,000 ad package I sold, I got $1,200, thought I was, the wealthiest person on the planet. And then, the other $4,800, we plowed back into the business, and then we sold it in 2016. So, it's been 6 years since we sold it.
Wild, man. How cool is that though? That just this idea, you're the first sales guy, just you two doing it. And then later on, years later, it's this extremely valuable asset that sets you guys up for the rest of your lives.
There were a lot of great takeaways. One, we built it to a very profitable, self-sustaining business. This was, and I think when we all see media companies, they're for the most part money-losing businesses propped up by venture capital that are desperate for an exit strategy. The company, we sold it to a private equity firm, which is kind of the holy grail of acquisitions, right? And the private equity firm didn't have anything to change. Their goal was just, put a little bit of debt and keep growing the business because it's a great business. And I think like the main takeaway is one was, what got you here won't get you there. Like what started as this once a week newsletter with interviews morphed into, when we sold it, really the core of the business was actually a conference business. We were selling more tickets every year than Coachella. Right. We were putting on 300 conferences a year around North America. We were publishing in what you call the NFL cities, like any city with an NFL team, basically. So, we had 30 cities. We had a local, reporter in each of the cities. We were basically the People magazine, only positive, but only positive news, but the People magazine of commercial real estate, and then to see after we sold it, like the innovation continued. Now there's, deep researched articles and, long form journalism. But to see what got you here won't get you there. And then a great quote, the riches are in the niches. Because the whole time we were building this, there are all these famous media companies that everybody read, and they had, tens of millions of readers. And, I think what it turned out is like the real value is like when you can deeply connect with your audience, which we were doing in Boston, in Houston, Texas, in Atlanta, in, Washington, DC, and Baltimore, right? Like, in South Florida, right? We didn't just have this kind of generalist publication. It was like very niche by city. And then the events, we had like an event every month in each city. So the people in the city didn't even really pay attention to the fact that we were also national and now, international. They were just focused on what we offered to their city because there was no commercial real estate news in their cities.
Wow. And so I was then reading about your first event with like entrepreneurs where you want to get a place out in Utah and go skiing. Was it like 20 guys that first one? Is that right?
Yeah.
And I remember just the thought of what was it that made you want to connect and bring together a group of leaders to go skiing or to do whatever it was that you wanted to do, and that became kind of the genesis of what now is this amazing business?
Well, I think what happens is that when you start, when you're in a business or starting a business, you realize that there are all these ancillary opportunities. And you could even say really interesting peripheral opportunities. and most of them you should let go, and you should, stay focused on the path ahead, right? Like, you don't want to be one of those people who's pitching something different every 90 days and, constantly has all these things, and you're lost in your conversation with them because they've said 8 different ventures they're working on and it's only been 10 minutes. But you want to take the thing you're working on and keep your eyes and mind open to, what possibilities could arise from that. And from this business with my dad and me leaving school early, I was very good at sales and I was not good at anything else. I had, and I think I had the self-awareness to realize I had no idea how to recruit people. I didn't know anything about company culture. I, didn't know anything about actually how to scale up a business. I didn't know how to find an office space. I didn't know how to build out products. I didn't know about branding. I mean, literally, I knew nothing. So I had this idea, what if I cold call, because I've been selling ads, so I was very comfortable cold calling people and getting rejected. What if I cold call people that I've read about and I invite them kind of on a under 30, business CEO summit? And so I, basically got to work cold calling, these young kids, the founders of Vimeo and College Humor and the founder of Tom's Shoes. And, one of the people would go on, be, running Y Combinator, like, really interesting people. And I got them together. I basically pitched them on this idea. Hey, we're all young entrepreneurs. I'm going to pay for a trip for 20 of us to get together for 3 days so we can, share information. It's like the analogy, like when you're a candle and you take the candle and you light another candle, like your candle still has a flame, but now the other candle has a flame, like doesn't take the flame to the second candle. And that's kind of the, same concept of sharing and trading information, like a rising tide lifts all ships, right? Like by sharing information, we're not taking anything from each other, right? We're not really competitors. There's very few competitors of all the people you ever meet in the world. Like there's basically no one who's actually your direct competitor. And so we all got together and just became 3 days trading information, trading ideas, trading contacts. It could be, I raise money from this person, or this is, a great place I go to hire folks. This is what we do for our branding. This is our agency. Yeah, and I made all these good friends, and that was the first summit ever. And there's great stories about like the first Burning Man that ever happened was like, I think it's like 4 families under a bridge, and there's stories of all these first events. And ours was 19, kind of goofy young entrepreneurial kids who everyone thought they were out of their minds, and we got together for 3 days.
The thing though that I find is Jason Gaynard, who has been at your events and I've been at his events, Mastermind Talks, calls himself a talent scout. Obviously, you are too. But you chose like Sam Altman, who's an amazing writer, and Y Combinator, you mentioned he ran it, and the guy who starts Tom's Shoes. Like the people that you chose and that you convinced to go, for some random dude cold calling them to go on a ski trip. Now, I know you paid for it, but still, I mean, not only did you get the people there, but the people you chose ended up being these amazing leaders. So how do you make your decision for who should be there? Because it's not like you aimed really low. You aimed extremely high and made it happen. I'm curious, one, like what you looked for in people and how you chose the people you did, and then how you convinced them to do it.
Well, one thing I always tell people when they're asking, they want to reach out to folks, like you got to reach out to people who are peers. You can't just reach, to the sky. And, it reminds me of a music manager looking to sign new clients. You can't sign, huge bands or musicians once they're already big. Right. You need to start and sign people who have potential. Right. And, I think when you look at the best CEOs, like, they really don't care about the stock price of a business. Like what I found, like deep in their soul, they care about the product, and they care about all the what you could call them, the facts on the ground, all the metrics that actually matter, the feedback and the net promoter score from the customers, and the stats on the call centers, and how those are working, the feedback from the team members, the direction that their sales are going, hopefully the return, the churn is coming down, whatever the various details are. Like, great leaders focus on those facts. They don't focus on external things. And so I think in the same way, like when I was recruiting people for the first event, I was going to these super early folks, like Tom's had only given away 10,000 pairs. And I wasn't looking, have they raised money? How famous are they? What's their value? I was just looking at, like, what is the product? How good is their story? How good is their team and their culture? And like, that's all that mattered. And, not all these companies are going to be successful, but ultimately, like, I've always tried to, like, actually look at important details about the business itself, not what the results will be of those details.
Interesting. So I want to, like, fast forward through some of the trips, because I read that you were told or heard about this mantra of keeping it real versus keeping it surreal. Can you share what the meaning behind that statement?
Yeah, it's a good mantra to apply to any experience that you're trying to create. We were at a dinner with this, very smart, eccentric chef at a friend's house. And he had, pioneered, pop-up restaurants and the underground food movement, doing these just, wild dinners. You do a dinner by the side of the highway where people had to bring in their own stools and tables, and they arrived and there was construction equipment there, and they had to actually build the table and eat next to the highway overpass. Like, he would just do these wild dinners. I think following the mantra that, like, doing something average, just there's no point because people won't remember it. So you always want to push the boundaries, even to the point if it's okay if some people are upset because they think you've pushed the boundaries so far. So we're at this dinner at a friend's house, and he was telling us all these stories. And he said, let me ask you this, with your summit events, and we'd only done a couple events at that point. He said, do you guys keep it real? And we looked at him, we said, of course we keep it real. I mean, who do you think you're talking to? Of course we keep it real. You've seen what we've done. And he said, well, that's a problem because everybody keeps it real. You need to keep it surreal. And it really was one of those moments that we then went back later that night. And as I have a few co-founders of Summit. We were all, keep it surreal. Who does he think he's talking to? First it was like, the different levels of rejection. First we couldn't believe he, said that to our face. And then I think we were kind of overcome with the realization, like, this is brilliant. Like, from now on, if we're going to, whatever we do, if people are going to check into the event, it's not going to be on plastic folding tables with, some grumpy folks. There's going to be a surreal element to it. If we're going to have lanyards that folks are going to wear, we're not just going to do the typical plastic ones that are with the print is too small. We're going to make beautiful wooden lanyards that people will actually take home to their house and or to take to their office, and it'll make a place in the office, like it would fit on the beautiful shelves you have behind you. If we're going to do a meal, we're not just going to have fancy folks in white gloves. Like, maybe we'll actually make the guests cook the food or make the guests serve each other. Whatever it is, we're going to ask, what about this experience could be memorable and surreal? And so I think that experience that was, it was like over 10 years ago, like, basically instantaneously changed how we went about producing events.
So I want to go deep on events. I'm a big fan of these. I mentioned Mastermind Talks and others. I haven't been to one of your events. Love to at some point. I've heard all the stories from Summit at Sea, one of those early ones when you guys spent $1 million to rent a boat, cruise ship. But let's kind of like deconstruct, because I think, Elliott, this is useful for all leaders, because especially when there are companies within corporate America where they have leadership offsites, so they do a national sales meeting kickoff or whatever it may be, and not enough of this type of like wooden lanyard thought process is put into it. They just go with the cheapest version, or they don't really care about the details. And I think the details are everything. Like, especially if it's your company, don't you want your people to be proud? So, but first part of that I want to focus on is the people in the room. I found when I analyze all of the events, whether it's like a leadership conference or whatever it may be, the best of the best attract the type of people that I want to be friends with, that I want to follow up with. From that Ojai experience in 2016, I was just texting with a few of the people that I met there last night. That's how the curation of the people at the event made the event. The other stuff was awesome, don't get me wrong. But so can you first talk to me about the people in the room, the people that you attract to come to your events, and why that it's so critical that, wow, I think the guest speakers and all that stuff, it's got to be great. It's really, though, about the people you meet in the hallways, the people you meet in between the sessions. That really seems to make an event.
Well, we have two criteria for inviting people to summit events. And I think that this criteria can be applied to basically any event, whether there's, formal invitations, or whether it's a dinner party, or, whether it's 100 people, 1,000 people, even if it's not formalized. I think that these two pieces of criteria can dramatically change the experience in the room. And they're really, really simple. Number one, are the people excitable, passionate people, doing work that they love? That's it. Simple. They don't have to be CEOs. They don't have to be famous. They don't have to be wealthy. Are they excitable? Are they passionate? Do they just show up every day and they just love their work? They're really driven, because that when you talk to someone like that, you already know how the conversation's going to go. And the second piece of criteria is simply, are they nice? And, that's it. And, when you have a nice person who's passionate about what they're doing, whatever it is, you can chat with them for hours. There's funny analogies I've heard over the years, like the Sacramento airport test. It's like, is this a person that you could sit with, for a 4-hour delayed flight at the Sacramento airport? I've heard people say like a no asshole rule, which I never resonated with that. I always have preferred to speak in the affirmative. Mm-hmm. Just so someone's not an asshole doesn't mean that they're really nice. So I just keep it really simple. And I would, as you think about even who you're going to go have lunch with, or who you're going to invite over, people who are passionate about anything, people are just excitable, and that they're nice, and so we've applied that to all of our events now, for more than a decade.
So let's go back earlier to that, the cruise ship you guys rented, and maybe you can share the backstory. How did you fill it up with great people? What was your process? Do they have to apply? Do they have to get accepted? What did it cost for them to be on the boat? Like, what did you guys do when you're on the boat? What was the cost for you? I'm curious about the whole experience, about the people who you had as attendees, as well as the teachers / performers / the things that you had going on.
Well, the first thing was that leading up to Summit at Sea, which was in 2011, mm-hmm. we had done about half a dozen events. And there had been the 19-person original trip, then a 60-person trip, 120-person event, 250, and then 750. So, our event before it had been in Washington, D.C. We'd taken over a hotel. We'd had, President Clinton had spoken. Mark Cuban had spoken. Sean Parker. So we were coming off, a
Wow.
very exciting
Was
event.
that
Like it would,
super expensive for all of them?
what do you mean?
The speakers.
Um, well, we have only paid two speakers ever in the history of Summit, and we made donations to their charities. And I can definitely talk about what
Wow.
our view is on like paying speakers and also what we offer speakers, because we do cover speakers travel and hotels, and there are some speakers you can just never book because they require speaking fees, and we do pay musicians for the most part, because we view
Okay.
that as quite different than speakers. Not,
Okay.
and again, depending on where, we don't have a huge budget, but, at the very least, if there were musicians that are offering to do it for free, we'll cover their costs and their hotels and whatnot. But we're basically coming off like a pretty big event. And we had this realization thinking about what we would do next, that we wanted to keep it surreal. Like, what would be next? An even bigger event at a fancier hotel, but you're still at a hotel in a city. And this is kind of how we arrived at the idea to do Summit at Sea, which was where we would buy out an entire cruise ship and we would basically reprogram it. We'd change the music to our super vibey music. We'd book the musical acts. We'd do the lighting. We would design the menus, and we would fill it with, this really incredible, excitable, group of people. And so, as we started putting those pieces in place, there started to be a lot of excitement. Wow, to come on a ship with that kind of energy and those kind of folks. And then we, before we even would send the invites, we'd always be working on, the speakers. And, you might have to send 50 speaker invites to get one big name, right? Like there's not like, well, I want that person, and that person. I mean, you have to send a lot of invites, and the timing really has to work well. Oh, well, so-and-so's actually going to be, your boat departs from Miami on this day. Well, so-and-so actually, has to, be in Miami that day, or they actually have been meaning to go to Miami for a whatever, to look at a real estate deal. So the timing's perfect. And once you get the big folks, oh, wow, so-and-so speaking and I can open for them. Well, I'll definitely make the trip to Miami. So we started building some momentum, and pretty soon we had Summit at Sea booked with, Richard Branson as the keynote and the Roots as the house band. And I think those two things kind of put it over the top. And then our process, then was, Summit was all about, word of mouth and friends of friends. That was the original idea, that people who had come to the previous events would introduce us to folks to come to these new events. And, we've never had a formal membership. I think we've had, we've considered kind of, a summit, or just anyone who's ever been to a summit event. And it can be helpful for groups to have memberships, or to kind of colloquially be referred to. I don't know if that's the right word, but, to have a casual moniker for the group, like summiters, right? And so, or burners would be a good example, right? Because if you don't know, in many ways, having a membership or like a moniker actually makes something more inclusive, because people actually know what they can be a part of. Things can feel almost like too secret or difficult to get into. Like, you actually, anyone can go to Harvard. You just have to, hit certain criteria and then get in. It's not like a big secret. You just, it's very hard. I shouldn't get in, but, you actually know what the criteria are, right? And, or anyone can, join a local chess club or a billiards club. You just have to be into billiards or be into chess, or anyone can become a member of a certain gym. So I think with Summit, it was kind of the same way, right? And it was like, our ethos was about entrepreneurs, right? I think like being an entrepreneur is glamorized and put on a pedestal, but, any entrepreneur listening to this, or anyone doing something, entrepreneurial, knows how challenging it is day in and day out, right? Because you have to create your own luck, create your own magic. You're ultimately responsible for everything. And so, I think also by making the event for entrepreneurs, it self-selected a group of people who wanted to be a part of it.
Gotcha. So how about then, how did you So you get Richard Branson, you get the roots. So now you can start marketing this thing. What's the process to sell tickets? Do you just put it on a website and send it to your email list and fire away social media? What was the process then to sell tickets, to sell out a boat that you had to front? I thought I read $1 million, right? So how did
Yeah,
that
that
work?
was the deposit because unlike a hotel where, if you don't sell the rooms and it's, certain days before the event, the hotel can then just turn and sell them. Like it's easier to sell, hotel nights in Los Angeles or,
Yeah.
New York City. A cruise, you can't, it's just hard to sell last minute cruises. Like people tend to not go on these events last minute. They're like kind of trips of a lifetime. And so they just tend to book them farther out. So you actually had to pay all the money up front. So you just needed a letter of credit from your bank, which obviously we didn't have. So we basically had to take all of our personal savings, all of the company savings, and the savings, like because our business, we just had one event a year. How it would work is you generate all that revenue at the event or leading up to it. And then often you wouldn't put your next event on sale the next day. Like you might want to wait 6 months. And so you would have like 6 months with no revenue. So your revenue for the previous event, it had to bridge a gap, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
So as Summit at Sea, we had to kind of take that revenue that was supposed to bridge that gap, and we had to spend it on our deposit and then, basically sell Summit at Sea, like, a couple weeks later or a month later. And so we just had a shorter window. Like, again, normally with a hotel, it might be the same cost, but they let you pay, 10%, 20%. You can just, pay every month over until the event. And we had to make this huge deposit. And then, we would never just blast the event. We would always go back, we would have kind of the early bird pricing, and we would go back to the people who'd supported us in the past, and they would get the first choice of the best rooms, and they would get the best pricing. And then we would always try to, have like very affordable rooms and like as affordable pricing as possible. Let's say as affordable as possible. And then we would set up a scholarship program that was funded through a variety of ways. So, we would have basically tickets that started in like the low 2000s, say $2,500, $2,800, $3,200, $3,600. And that could start from like where you could get a shared quad room and you could share a room with 4 people. We had shared triples, we had shared doubles. Then you'd have your balcony rooms, then you'd have your solo rooms, then you'd have your suites, and then you'd have, your penthouses. So we would take the inventory of the whole ship, and then we would divide it up in a way that we thought would work for the folks buying tickets. And you could have, 3 people splitting a penthouse, right? So the rooms would go from like, say, $2,500 up to tens of thousands of dollars. Right, because there are some very successful people spending tens of thousands of dollars for a suite, and almost like first class subsidizes economy on an airplane. Like I read an article once to be thankful for all the people who spend money on first class, because they're actually the ones, like they get every single thing is the same as economy, right? Every single thing. They leave at the same time, they arrive at the same time. Like it's literally the same, except they sit in a little more comfy seat. And then they're just paying many, many multiples everybody else and subsidizing the whole flight. And so if there were no first class seats, like everyone would have to pay more. So that was kind of similar to our philosophy. Like at our events, we didn't have any VIP. There was no green room, or, there was no, it's just everyone was treated exactly the same. The only difference is you could have a nicer room.
Wow. Okay.
And a lot of people barely slept for the entire event. I'd run into people and I'd be like, "Oh, how's that shared quad?" They're like, "I haven't been to it yet." I'm like, "What do you mean? It's day 3." He's like, "Yeah, I got a lot of rest leading up to Summit."
Wow. So how was it for you? You're in the middle of it. You're running the event. I'm just fascinated by this process. I know just from doing some smaller things, you hardly have time to think. You oftentimes don't even eat because of like all the different craziness. How was that first one for you?
The first Summit at Sea?
Yeah.
Well, there were a lot of positives to it, the main positive was that we had one contract with one cruise company. And they were in charge of the food, the hotel, the stages, the pool, whereas, when we were doing bigger events, like in downtown Los Angeles, which we did for 3 years, like we had to do everything. So we had different contracts with every single theater, different contracts with all the food providers, different parking lots we rented. Then we brought in, experienced designers to build out the parking lots into, could be, outdoor, dining halls or sitting areas or lounges. And so with the cruise company, for the most part, there was one point of contact. The challenge was then doing everything on a ship is infinitely more difficult. Like imagine trying to serve good food on an airplane. Like it became, much, much more difficult. And then also we didn't get to show up days before, like they're just running cruises. So, we might have 24, 36 hours,
Gotcha.
And then imagine running a band on a ship and you don't have cell service, you're in the middle of the ocean. So there were some things that made it a lot easier. There's some things that made it a lot difficult. There's a really funny story in our book I have that, when everybody showed up for Summit at Sea, we said, all right, check-in begins at 8 a.m. We'd asked, I think, the cruise company to give us early check-in. So that way for the 1,400 people boarding, they could check in from 8 a.m. all the way till the ship departed at I think it was midnight. And nobody showed up. Like not at 8, not at 10, not at 12. And I think it wasn't until like 4 o'clock that people showed up, and they came like almost like the Great Migration. And what had happened is that everyone had come in the night before, and there'd been a pre-event that we'd done, and everyone was so excited that they just stayed up all night hanging out with all these new friends, went to breakfast with them in the morning. They were all staying at the same hotels. And everyone and so what happened is when they finally showed up, there's no quick way to let someone on a cruise ship. Like it's like going through customs, like literally through the equivalent of customs. So when throngs of people come and there's, 12 agents or 8 agents for hundreds of people. So suddenly the thing is packed, and we look, oh my gosh, like we had asked them to, open early, more, it just didn't occur to us. So the place is packed. We go always say, I'm so sorry, that you're standing in line, Mr. and Mrs., Hawk, and they're like, this is the worst event I haven't even gotten on the ship, and this is a disaster. I'm like, no, this isn't our fault. We asked everyone to come on. Like, I don't care. You don't make me, I've been in line for an hour. So we thought, oh my gosh. So we went back to our playbook, keep it surreal. Okay. So we had like really good DJs. So we mobilized and we got one of our DJs, we got all their equipment down to the, it's like the Port of Miami lobby. We got all the food that we were going to serve, brought on trays, and we literally threw a party, like got the lights dimmed. We literally threw a party in the Port of Miami, effective, like it would be like throwing a party at TSA security, outside of security, in the airport lobby. And music up, bopping, people dancing, and people saying, this is, pretty soon. And then all of our team came down, introducing people in line to everyone else. So suddenly in line, everyone's meeting, everyone in front of them and behind them, there's music on. And then people are saying this, because then only by the time it was jammed, say only a few hundred people were really angry at us. The other 1,200 hadn't arrived yet. And so when the new people came in, they hadn't seen that there was like a super bright lights, awkward screening center with everyone waiting. They just arrived to a party and we're like, welcome. Like, this is the best check-in I've ever seen at an event in my entire life.
Love that. How you turn a bad situation into a good one. Yeah. And I just like the you just mentioned your book again, which I talked about a little bit earlier, make no small plans, because it's this kind of, part of the subtitles, lessons on thinking big. And I love that that's kind of your default setting. It seems like this lesson on thinking big, whether you're going to buy a mountain or go on a cruise ship. But overall, the reason that people, I'm guessing, continue to come back is because you have figured out how to be a master of experiential design. The experience is everything for those people, to create these memorable moments with amazing people. So for someone, let's say they've either never really thought about an event, but again, they're a mid-level leader within a company and they're going to have an offsite or they're going to do an event coming up in 6 months, and they just kind of put other people on that, and then they just show up, and it's just like it's they're kind of lame. They're like most of these events. If you had to write your almost constitution on putting together and throwing an amazing event, and we got to get broad here, not just the summit event, but just in general, what are some of the must-haves on that list that are on your event constitution?
Yeah, well, I have a good thing I've always thought about, which is, high cool, low cost. High cool, low cost, and meaning very high cool factor, low on spending money. I talked to a friend literally today, and his kid's birthday is coming up. And what his kid really wants is this extremely expensive jacket that my friend can't afford. And I just said, the problem with the jacket, the problem with this whole setup is that jacket is very low cool, high cost. Like, it's not a particularly cool thing to have a jacket. It's one thing that you're not going to wear that often, and it's very expensive. I bet for practically nothing, you could create, a mind-blowing, almost like scavenger hunt around the city. Oh, you live in London? Why don't you go on a scavenger hunt to find all the Banksies? Like, literally costs nothing. And the value of that, the memory of that for a lifetime. And I think bring that back to events. I'll give one analogy that just always stuck with me. We were trying to do an event in Manhattan, and we just couldn't afford any of the restaurants. We really wanted to bring like 30 people together, and the private room minimums, over $100 a person, if not more. We just couldn't afford it. It would have been thousands of dollars, $5, $6, $7, $8,000 to do a dinner. So it's not even remotely in our budget of, maybe $20 a person. Like, literally, we have $600 for a dinner, the 6,000, 10x more. And we also were out of time because we were out of time because I think we had told people, this event needs to be, in, next week, and we, no money, no time. And somebody offered us an apartment that we thought seemed really fantastic. But when we got to the apartment, it was down this long, dark, dingy hallway, this really crusty elevator. And then the apartment was just like small and like every part of it was like, we're trying to impress like these amazing people. And this is what we have. And I think this is where we went back again to the, keep it surreal. Or basically, and then, every situation you should try to flip almost. And what we did was we made sure it was dark when everyone arrived. And we went back to kind of this chef, Michael Hebb, and one of his philosophies is like, when in doubt, just turn off all the lights and do something at night and uplight everything with lamps or candles or fake candles. And so we turned off all the lights of this hallway, all the lights in the elevator, all the lights in the apartment. And suddenly it was all uplit by, whether it was like those cheap orbs you can hang or like the candles in the elevator. And then we'd have like these cheap little speakers, you can get for $20. And there was a hallway speaker and an elevator speaker and an apartment speaker. It's not like we had Sonos wired, right? These little speakers with different soundtracks. And then the apartment, we just set it up where, everyone helped serve and people arrived early. We're helping to cook. So the experience was literally, you went to this neighborhood you'd never been to. You went through, into this hallway. You couldn't see anything except it was like the wildest uplighting. The elevator had this, incredible music, the apartment, the uplighting. And at the end, people were saying like, this is really one of the most amazing dinners I've ever been to in my life. Memorable. They never experienced anything like it. And so I think, when you bring it back to events and checklists of what can you do, and you have to start with the venue, right? And if you're doing something in a hotel and it's bright and it's the daytime, it's a tough one, right? I think, you really need to think very thoughtfully. I would always start with the location. Like, what location is special? And look, as the event gets bigger, it gets harder to do surreal locations. It's not easy when the event's over 200 people, right? Because at 50 people, you can go to a team member's house, or you can rent a house, or you can, every city has places you can rent, and often quite inexpensively, right? There's famous, restaurants in LA that ended up making all their money because at night the restaurant would shut at like 11, and they would turn into a nightclub at night. And, suddenly at night, this restaurant transformed into a nightclub. And you can almost do the opposite, right? You can find restaurants that, don't open until dinner, or don't open, and so, they literally open at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, and you go to the restaurant and ask them if you could rent it out in the daytime. So now you're at like this really cool restaurant and you have 150 people there, right? So whether you have no budget or you have some budget, I think, the idea of every city has botanical gardens, that you can rent out, and the botanical gardens have unique and creative spaces, right? And I think, again, the bigger your event is and the more formal it is, the tougher it's going to be. But if if it's a team offsite or a team retreat, just by starting in an interesting location, and just, getting even emailing, I like getting people involved ahead of time, even emailing the team and asking them, what are the wildest venues you could think of, in this city. I mean, I'm in Miami now, Ryan, and you're not going to believe this. You can book, I like playing tennis. I grew up playing tennis. You can book the center court of this famous tennis stadium for, I think it's like $15 an hour per person. I can literally, for $30, take someone to play tennis on an empty center court. Like, there's kind of random experience like that things that feel like almost money can't buy, or they feel impossible, like, are actually might be $30 an hour.
Yeah, I just feel like you're floating with ideas. Like, one of the things you write about is no idea should go unspoken. It's like giving yourself permission just to get them out there. Can you share more? Like, I think ideas are like a quantity game. In order to find the quality, you just need a ton of them, and then eventually you get to the good ones. It's like writing a book, the same thing. You got to get it all out in order to get to the good stuff. What is your mindset there on ideas and getting them out there, and then to finding something that could be a really amazing experience?
Yeah, I mean, the nice thing about ideas is that if you don't do it, no harm, no foul. So it doesn't matter if you don't do it. So, and you can end an idea in 2 seconds and just say, what, that was a good idea. Ryan can say, Elliott, that's an interesting one, but I don't think tennis is right for this event, or I don't think that's a little too far. Okay, next, great, no problem. So I agree with you. Ideas are a quantity game. And in fact, that's why I like to get other people involved. I'm constantly calling people, and I'm pushing their buttons. I'm saying, like, Ryan, like, if you think back to the events you've done, have you ever been to an event in a really surreal, out there, wild experience? And what was it? Was it, instead of, and I'm also kind of obsessed with trying to do the opposite. It's a little bit like up the contrarian viewpoint, but, rather than going to the Four Seasons, find like a dilapidated hotel or kind of a random place, right? And also, the farther you can make people go out of their comfort zone, if they finally, when they finally do arrive, then they're deeper into the experience, right? Like, we would find in our Washington, D.C. event, people were actually leaving the event just to have, lunches away from the event, because we were in a city. Where in Miami, there was no escaping that. Or when we were in, Summit at Sea, they were, so deep in the event. Sorry, go ahead.
You mentioned earlier, you were able to convince these amazing speakers to do it for expenses, essentially, when a lot of these people probably are getting paid tons to go speak. How are you able to do this?
Well, I think the key when you're inviting anyone to anything is it has to be beneficial for that person. If they're paying for a ticket, it has to be beneficial. If they're speaking, it has to be beneficial. And if there's no benefit, then they're going to make you pay. And
Mhm.
that's beneficial, right? Like, so I think for, our attendees, we were trying to create this experience with incredible people, with incredible programming that would make it worthwhile. A nice hotel might be $500 a night, 800. I mean, there's hotels that are $1,000 a night. So, our view was, if we could charge as much as a nice hotel, but have all these other things included, that would make it worth the ticket price. Then for, the speakers, our view was, we want to invite or recruit speakers to come where the speaker can also benefit from, the community. And I think like a good example would be in 2017, we had Jeff Bezos speak. And, I think why that worked well was that, as he was becoming more and more well-known, like nobody really knew his story. Like whatever you think of him, I think we think of our events a little bit like a media platform. Like, your job is just to tell people stories. You can take sides for issues, but it's important to tell people stories and let them tell their story so that the audience can judge and the audience can make up their own mind, right? Like I think most of us believe that it's important, it's important for us to be able to listen to different viewpoints so that we can make our own decisions, hear debates on different topics. And so our view was, as Jeff Bezos is becoming more and more well-known, Summit could be a really good platform for him to speak. At this event was like 2,500 people, for him to speak to 2,500 people of the next generation. And, then we put all the content online. And what we came up with was, what if we asked his brother to interview him? And they really focused it on, his story, how did he grow up? What lessons did he learn? What are his core values? And I think, that pitch, the fact that it was him speaking to this next generation, that it was like so deeply personal, and it was a chance for him to share. I think that really resonated with him. Like that was actually something that would be beneficial as he was trying to share more of who he was. And so I think, we've booked, over 1,000 content sessions. And I think we try to take that same approach to, every person we book. Like there's going to be people where they have no benefit speaking to our group. There's nothing that, their message is already out or we're the wrong audience. But, as we do the same kind of brainstorming exercise, I'd like to think that any event that's happening, that anyone is putting on, they're assembling a group of people and there are people interested in speaking to that group of people and people that group of people is interested in hearing. And that's, by the way, if you just rewind, why our real estate events work so well, because in each of these cities, there's what we call micro celebrities. And those developers and architects in those cities, like they want to tell their story so they can become better known, but the attendees also want to hear their story so they can know what's happening. And so real estate became this incredible, again, is it circuitous? Is that, kind of a spider web of people wanting to hear from each other that just ended up working really, really well. And I'll say, we had the founder of Chobani as well a couple of years ago. And he had done this amazing thing where he'd, given a percentage of his company back to all the employees. The founder of Chobani is like a, billionaire founder of this incredible yogurt company. And he is an immigrant who came to America. And at the time of that speech, he really wanted to talk about, number one, giving as a founder. Well, great. We have thousands of attendees who are entrepreneurs. So he actually really wanted to share that message with our community. And he also really wanted to put his foot down and talk about, the power of, immigrants impacting, America in so many positive ways, and to share his own story. So it was the same thing where like our community was desperate to hear from him, but he also was really passionate and excited to share his story with our community.
How, I think and I know I'm thinking this because as part of the beginning of this podcast 7 years ago, as I was starting it, there was just tons and tons of cold emails, all of that, a lot of rejection, a lot of being ignored. It's a little bit different now where there's a number of relationships built with PR people so it's more back and forth. how does one even get to like a Jeff Bezos or the CEO of Chobani? Like, how do you even get that conversation started?
Well, as you climb higher and higher up the ladder, if you will,
Right.
it becomes, more and more and more difficult to connect with folks.
Yeah.
And, those are relationships built over like literally a decade, and
Yeah.
not necessarily the relationships with those people, but, it could be, it's very often, Ryan, people who have come to summit events for many, many years, where, our view is that, the most selfish thing you can do is give unselfishly. It's a good life quote: give, give, give. And it's all, you have no expectations, but in general, it's a good strategy for things coming around.
Mm-hmm.
And so often, like, one of the most common ways that we have gotten speakers is attendees who've been our community that have been coming to summit events will just reach out to us and say, I've been friends with someone. I think here's why it would be good for, they will literally say, I've been friends with so-and-so. Here's why it would be good for them. Like, someone reached out here, Adara is the new CEO of Uber. I think this is why he would benefit from speaking at Summit. Or here's why I think Martha Stewart would benefit from speaking at Summit. Or here's what Brene Brown would get out of speaking at Summit. And so it's almost always introductions. And, when we started, it was, people who are not as well known. And also we do have a lot of our content is just the people who are attending are sharing, and we're having a lot of back and forth open dialogues.
Yeah.
But look, it takes, it's 1 in 50 at that level. Like I'm making it seem like pop, 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 all these people say yes, but often you get all these intros and that we have a whole team and there's a whole process. And, many people, many of the speakers took 6 to 8 years to speak. Wow. Where it was ongoing every single year. Would you like to come? Go down the rabbit hole. No. And there's still people who, after all these years, we still have not been able to get to speak. And that's okay, because, we're doing our best. We're putting off forward, what we can offer. And if people don't speak, it's okay.
It's kind of similar to a podcast. At the beginning, you are just basically begging people to come on the podcast. And then as you evolve and it grows, it becomes a platform that people will then ask to be on, because as you said, like it could do a lot of good for them to help spread their message, to get it out to a different group of people. It shows I can invest an hour and reach hundreds of thousands of people. It's worth it. So then it almost flips, where instead of you now all going out, they're more coming to you, and then you're deciding who's a good fit while you're still, have your eye on some people, probably like a Bezos, so I think that part's really, it has to be pretty gratifying for you that now you've become the place where people are like raising their hand saying, can I get on that stage? Can I get on that stage? And these are really well-known people that have accomplished a lot.
Thanks. Yeah. I'd also just encourage people, it's very valuable to be known for discovering people before they're well-known.
Yeah.
And it's also infinitely easier to get speakers before they're well-known. And so the two kind of go hand in hand, but being known as a place that recruits the next generation to speak. And by the way, 5 years later, since hopefully, or even 10 years later, we're all playing the long game here. You say, I had so-and-so when they were, just at the very beginning of their journey. Travis Kalanick was speaking at, he was the founder of Uber, was speaking on the stage at Summit. It's like 2015. And he literally looked at the crowd and he said, 3 years ago, like I was in the crowd, and so I think, we've always, like, a lot of this people who are speaking, it's simply because for 10 years, they've, been coming to the Summit events, or we've built relationships with them. So, it's a hard game to have to go after the busiest, most, well-known people who get thousands and thousands of requests. That is not a good winning strategy. Like, it can be part of the strategy that, it's 10% and you put the amount of time in it and hopefully a couple hit each year. But for the most part, you want to have a higher percentage of people that say yes.
Yeah. And find them a little earlier on. As you've done.
We do a lot of asking. What would be beneficial to you if you came on? What are you? Oh, wow, you have this new thing that you want to share.
Yeah.
perfect. Well, here's how that actually would work for our community. Or, you know what, that doesn't make sense for us. Let's talk again next year.
Yeah, man. Elliott, I know we're at time. I really appreciate this, though. It was really, really cool just to get inside your mind of how you think about all this stuff and how you built what you built. The book's called Make No Small Plans, Lessons on Thinking Big, Chasing Dreams, and Building Community. I know it's been in the works for a while. It's really cool you guys put it out. I like how you described it, right? The craziest 1,500 days of my life from age 21 to 26. Like, that's pretty cool that you did that. Maybe if you have a second, you could just share a little bit about the craziest 1,500 days of your life.
Yeah, I mean, the book is it's simply about when I had no contacts, no resources, and everybody thought I was out to lunch, off the deep end. My decision to leave college early, and then how I met my Summit co-founders, and how with the co-founders, from that first event with 19 people up through Summit at Sea, hearing about that Powder Mountain was for sale, like the Powder Mountain, and the process of how we were able to purchase it. And the book, ends the day that we buy Powder Mountain in 2013. So it's basically this, 5-year sprint that is kind of leaves you. Yeah, it's really funny. We're just off the deep end. It's a really good story.
Yeah, it's awesome. No, it's really cool. I encourage people to check it out. It's really good. And I'm really grateful for you, man. So thanks so much for investing your time with me today, man. I'd love to continue our dialogue as we both progress.
Love to. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
Cool. Thank you, Ryan.